So I just want to say on a lighter note, this presentation comes out of some of my work as a neuroeducator and trainer for training in industry and in schools, because as you'll find out, there are more generations in the workforce than ever before. And of course, working at a community college, there are a lot of generations in the classroom. So teaching faculty about who is going to be in their classrooms, and then working with trainers in industry to help build teamwork and things like that when you've got such a diverse population working together. Oh, I'm too short. Thank you. I feel really tough. I was a little concerned about doing a presentation so soon after I had led a discussion, and I was assured that my being up here relieved you from having to be up here. And so I said, okay, I'll do this. So I'm going to dance through this, and we're going to look at surviving generational differences, or as the British say, mind the gap. So, teacher that I am, trainer that I am, I just want you to call out the answers to this. And I'm going to give you just a few vocabulary words, and I'd like you to think about what these words meant to you as a child when you were young and what they mean to kids today, okay? So we're going to just start with cell. Okay, I hear jail. I'm surprised. You were kids and you knew about jail cells? I did not put a picture up of that. I put a picture of the cell, biological cell. But of course, today it means, that's right. Yeah, okay. This is a fun one. Okay. Are you wearing your thong? So when I was growing up, thongs versus today. Still wearable, but in different parts, okay. Tweet. Yes, birds tweeted. Today we tweet as a form of communication. Bad. Okay, right. So in my youth, bad was not good. And of course today, if it's really bad, it's really good. And one last one. Oh. Far away, like way out in the boonies, right? Now this has relevance today because, of course, when I was teaching online, I could teach remotely, so I could be anywhere. I had Wi-Fi and I could travel and teach remotely, but I had students who were taking my classes that were based here in Salem, and they were in Germany and Saudi Arabia and things like that. And of course today, it refers to this, and actually, you can program your cell phones to be remote, and now you don't even really need to use your fingers. You can just talk into your remote or talk to your television and create remotes. So the times they are changing, right? So I want to play just part of this. If I have time after it, I'll play the rest of it, but I want to just get started with a fun little thing here. This is Cam.
Here's my group. This is Generation X. 45 million people in the U.S. Tend to be the most cynical, unhappy, unpleasant, and unlikable people you'll ever come across. That's kind of a generalization. But if you think about everyone you don't like, they're all Generation Xers. I have no doubt about that. A quick compare and contrast will spell this out very clearly. Now, let's talk first about the baby boomers. Baby boomers in this room. When you were a newborn baby, brand new, fresh, still steaming baby, how did you get home from the hospital? Likely like this, right? In a parent's arms on the front seat of the car. The car had a metal dashboard. The car had no seat belt. At the time, the reference to an airbag was Uncle Joe. Don't talk to Uncle Joe. He's an airbag. Don't let that guy. Don't talk to him. It has no context like it has today. In baby boomers, if your parents truly loved you, brand new, fresh, still steaming baby boomer, if your parents truly loved you, they cracked the window while they smoked on the way home. You can see this, right? Baby boomers in this room, were you ever told that you were special and unique and different from everyone else? Probably not. If you ever heard something like that, it sounded something like this. What do you think, you're special or something? So it was actually an accusation to stand out. To be different was an accusation. And then today, let's go to the slides. Then today, we begin to see things like this. These are my daughter's ribbons from the swim meet this past summer. We have 8th, 10th, 7th, 9th, 8th, 7th, 5th, 11th, 10th, and another 11th place ribbon. That's a talented child, isn't it? I do not make this up. She got an 11th place ribbon in a 6-lane pool. This summer, I'll drive my children, again, to North Carolina from Mobile, Alabama. They'll all be in the car seat doing what? You know this. What are they doing back there? Exactly. This, TV, this, game, something like that. Many of them have a headphone on. I can't hear. And I should be grateful that they're quiet. But I feel like there's a rite of passage in our nation that is being missed on these kids, and that is being beat with a yardstick on a road trip. It's something that has helped all of us, I imagine, in some way or another. And I can just imagine making eye contact with one of my children somewhere between Montgomery, Alabama and Atlanta and showing them this yardstick as I'm going down the road and making eye contact with them and them realizing slowly, he's about to hit me with this yardstick. And saying to them, I can't explain to you why this is good for you. And they're in a 5-point harness, so they can't run. That's the best part about it. They're in a 5-point, they can't go anywhere. Just put this in context for the millennial.
Okay, I'll continue. If we have time afterward, I'll play the last part of that. So, I was raised with 7 siblings, and my oldest brother is almost 20 years older than my youngest brother. And so I grew up in a family, or in a household of 3 generations, and actually mostly 4, because my Italian grandparents lived 4 houses away and spent, Italians, we spent all our time together. So 4 generations. My goals for you today are the AAA. I'd like you to gain an awareness of the differences and the reasons for them, an appreciation for our differences, and acceptance rather than judgment. So, I see no hope for the future of our people if they are dependent on the frivolous youth of today, for certainly all youth are reckless beyond words. Well, when I was a boy, we were taught to be discreet and respectful of elders, but the present youth are exceedingly wise and impatient of restraint. And the important thing here was that it was written in 700 BC. The generation gap is not new. So take a moment to consider the following. Do you see optical or illusion first? Do you see me or you? Do you see good or evil? Okay. Let your eyes follow the pink dots. If your eyes follow the movement of the rotating pink dot, the dots will remain only one color pink. If you stare at the black plus mark in the center, the moving dots turn to green. Now concentrate on the black in the center, and after a short while you'll see a single green dot going around. It's amazing how our brain works because, of course, there's no green dot, and the pink ones don't really disappear. It's how your eyes move with how your eyes and brain work. So I use this as proof that we don't always see things the way we think we see them. So which is the right way? Of course, there is no one way or right way, as much as we'd like to believe that. The Quran says we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. And this is especially true with generational differences. Our perceptions inform our interpretation, and of course, they in turn inform our behaviors, because we really do what we think. So the ability to change awareness and to see other sides of things eliminates that low brain defensiveness. Here are some things all generations have in common. We want respect, we want a sense of fairness, or we have a sense of fairness, and we want an opportunity to contribute. How these are demonstrated in our behaviors is what's different. What are some things that separate us? This is where I teach students to flex their pecs. Okay? And the PECS stand for the 4 major things that have an influence on generations. 1, political events. Did you grow up in a time of peace or a time of war? Were there crises? So like 9/11 or Virginia Tech. What was the perception of the economy? Okay, and economy teachers will tell you it's the perception that drives spending. So it doesn't necessarily mean what's true, but do we believe that we're living in good economic times or tight times? What were the cultural events of the time? So we have immigration now. Were there movements? What were the influences of the arts, science, technology, innovations, etc.? And then social circumstances. How is the family portrayed? Or what's the family norm or suggested norm? All these other things, communication, racial standing. And of course, there's the caveat that these are the 4 major influences socially, but there are all kinds of influences individually also. So generational distinctions exist today with greater range of representation. It's the first time in history that more generations are in the workforce. And there's always been generations in the workforce, but now there's a broader range. And the only time we had this probably was on farming, where the whole family farmed. Otherwise, there were, older people went to work, that kind of thing. The reason for this is more people are living well, and they're living longer, and many people are delaying retirement. So there are later generations in the workforce. I love this. Every generation rebels in some way, right? You remember your generation and what it did? So there was the long hair of the hippies, polyester and tube tops of the 70s. I love the shoulder pads of the 80s. Jelly sandals of the 90s, etc. Each generation has distinguished itself from the previous generation. There's even records of Puritans, the young Puritans making distinction. Every generation eventually gives up their visible forms of rebellion. So the hippies don't necessarily have the long hair anymore. That's not always true. There's the Eugene Festival and things like that. The thing they don't give up is that core value. They just represent it differently, because those are much too important to compromise. So imagine you are a parent in the early 50s, okay? Clear expectation, roles, father knows best, women stay home, raise children, that kind of thing. It's really clear. People dance cheek to slow melodic music, right? Was the norm. Now imagine that your young children, your young adults start listening to music like this, and they start dancing in the same manner. The world's going to the Think about the times and put yourself in their place. Their concerns as a parent were that music was loud, sacrilegious, and racial. The dance was frenzied and sexual. The dance called the Hucklebuck was described as a very nasty dance. Do any of you know the Hucklebuck? All right, we got some here. So horrible. On the radio in the 40s, rhythm and blues was taboo, although there were some DJs who broke the rules and played it. In 36, Philip Nuttall, the American Society of Teachers of Dancing, expressed the opinion that swing would not last beyond the winter. Fortunately, returning soldiers were instrumental in bringing swing to the forefront, and it kind of stuck around. Now, imagine how Elvis Presley was regarded. He was young, hip-thrusting, white-singing musician that was singing essentially some of the black music, right? Part of his attraction, teenagers, he epitomized everything they thought their parents would hate. He was cocky, slick, brash. and, basically a degenerate. But after Elvis appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, a Catholic priest in New York scorned Sullivan for his moral injury and condemned Presley for the voodoo of defiance and frustration. And now, we love Elvis. Boomers will remember the Beatles and the impact, right? It wasn't their music or dancing that was a concern. What was it? Hair. Look at how long that hair is. Okay. You'll find that hair and music are two of the easiest things for generations to rebel using. Okay? So what do adults despair of today? Oh, those tattoos, all the texting, the lacks of good social skills, and the hair. So it's easy to fear what the next generation is coming to. It's been happening for thousands of years. Okay. So who are they and what are their values? I'm going to talk ostensibly about four: the veterans, also known as loyalists, the greatest generation, seniors, matures, traditionals, the baby boomers, also known as just boomers, and I'll point out in this picture that we had 3D glasses way back then. Post-boomers are the Gen Xers and the Millennials, okay, Echo boomers, Gen Y, Nexers. There are also people who are on the cusp. They might be between the two generations, or they might have had a strong influence also. And then I'll speak a little bit about the Z generation that's coming into the world now, or coming into the workforce. So traditionals were born between 25 and 42. Some consider it as early as 1945. I won't ask anybody to raise their hands or anything like that. This group lived lives of war. World wars introduced them to international politics, and there were real clear heroes and villains, right? Good guys and bad guys. The goal was to grow up to be adults, and I purposely chose this picture because in terms of what they're wearing, you can't really distinguish them from adults, right? You were a child and then you became an adult. The concept of teenage years as a separate entity came in the late 50s, early 60s, again with television and music. Their goal was to make the world better for their children. And I'm going to refer to as them, even though I know there are some of you in the working group here, okay? Think about the people in their lives, okay? Joe McCarthy, the Rat Pack, FDR, John Wayne, Bob Hope, Betty Crocker, Normandy, Hiroshima, Korea, Bay of Pigs, Midway, Iwo Jima, Pearl Harbor. They stood in bread lines, had victory gardens, sat on front porches and in church pews. Families listened to the radio as a family. And importantly, there was a single head of household. Now consider what these people modeled for this generation, and consider how these places and experience influence the perspectives of this generation, okay? Now as we go through other generations, think about these same things. For traditional, if things were scarce, you made do or you went without. You saved for a rainy day. Your defining experiences were again the wars, the Depression, education. They're described as hardworking, God-fearing, patriotic, dollar-conscious, and loyal. And like the military chain of command and single head of household, there was that matching, okay? Leaders led and the troops followed. There was a real clear chain of command. Because of some of the things like Pearl Harbor, the recognition was that the enemy could strike at any minute, so you wanted to be prepared and alert at all times. So take a moment to nod to somebody that you recognize a traditional and think about how you communicate with them. You might introduce yourself as a traditional. Okay, let's move on to the baby boomers. Baby boomers were born between 46 and 64 and had lives of early television. Some defining events were Sputnik in their early years, Vietnam in their later years. Their goal was and is to grow up to be young. And you notice this in the amount of pills, spa treatments, all the activities in terms of, staying young. Oh, excuse me. The people that were influential for them, you'll notice that a lot of them were activists. Okay. Places were Watergate, Hanoi Hilton, Chappaquiddick, Kent State. National advertising had a huge impact on this generation because they went away from door-to-door salesmen to catalogs and television advertising that could tell you what they were doing on the East and the West Coast, and you too could have it in the Midwest or the South. People were moving out into the suburbs, and people were involved in the boardroom, the delivery room, and the divorce court. So even when I was born, my dad wasn't allowed in the delivery room. When my youngest 3 siblings were born, he was there right along with my mom. I don't know that he was thrilled about that, but he was there. Family watched TV together on Sunday night. For boomers, products were available, anything was possible, and some defining experiences were a good economy, political involvement, because the civil rights and women's rights went on at this time, and they were used to sitting in, loving in, est, and hippies, right? They're described as workaholics, free-thinking, competitive, idealistic, entrepreneurial. This is a group that said, don't trust anyone over 30, and now are beyond that. They were very anti-establishment, so instead of chain of command, it was change of command. Again, they protested, sat in, and checked out. This group defined stress, right? And alternatives to medicine, to the workplace, because women were going into the workplace, and again, to the delivery room. So take a moment to nod at someone that you recognize the background of a baby boomer and how you will communicate with them in mind. I see some nods. So Gen Xers, they were born between 65 and 80, okay? They grew up with media and 24-hour television and cable, right? Now the important thing about cable is that it didn't have to follow the rules of the major networks. So lots of sex, swearing, all that kind of stuff could happen on cable that couldn't happen when we only had 3 channels to watch, right? And then CNN, of course, is 24-hour news. So access becomes very important to them. These people were born in the fast lane, and their parents would sue if you didn't get it to them on time. And for them, their goal is to grow up at all. Look at the people in their lives that had an impact, okay? Bill Gates, Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky, Ted Bundy, and Al Bundy, the Menendez brothers, O.J. Simpson. We go from being clearly the good guys versus the bad guys to really no single hero. And at this same time, because of 24-hour television, everything is exposed. So even American heroes, Jefferson and people like that, you're getting all of the bad stuff about them. So they grow up constantly hearing about this person does this good thing. Oh, but this is the history behind that, and they're really not that good. They were latchkey kids. They grew up with divorce being more common. They had extended families, multiple homes, because they went to dad one weekend, mom the next weekend. Violence could be next door. This is a generation that grew up seeing kids like them on milk cartons. Their parents were soccer moms, super moms, and hovering parents all the time. Access to the world via the internet was there all the time, and they even were marketed to with the message that image is everything. Anything negative was possible. Again, they got a lot of that. And their defining experience were single-parent households, dot-coms and designers, the AIDS epidemic, Crack cocaine, child molesters, and drunk drivers. This is when MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, was what came in, and again, just a lot of information about these kinds of things that they didn't talk about on Andy Griffith when I was growing up. They're described as skeptics, cautious, overeducated and underemployed, intensely private and unpredictable. Is it any wonder? They challenge the status quo and rigidity and don't trust anybody but their peers. Now, for a lot of them, they were home as latchkey kids, depending on each other and their peers. They realized that the me generation of their parents didn't work, so they are looking at self-command, and they have access to information on the internet. They redefine the workplace to have fun, to be loyal to a point, and just instead of my father and my grandfather who had a job and stuck with it until they got the gold watch or whatever, these are mobile. If the job doesn't work, well, I'll go find another one. And I don't even have to have another one to go find one. I'll go find one, okay? There's something else I was going to say about that. Oh, they also watched their parents stay with jobs, and then the company went out of business or the company changed hands, and their parents lost jobs. So that sense of loyalty is like, well, just how loyal do I need to be to a company that may not be loyal back? They prefer to get information as like, what do you want? And then just let me go do it. So take a moment to nod if you know someone like this or you raise somebody like this. The millennials were born just before the millennium, and technology is absolutely their norm. My friend was complaining that his daughter was getting into, at that time, the VCR, and he said, my other two daughters didn't do that. And I said, your other two daughters didn't have that technology to play with. Because of 24-hour television, this is the time when celebrities are really becoming the rule. You pay attention to what's going on TV, and celebrities have a great influence. This is the most marketed to generation. They're the most observed, tracked, and analyzed. And their goal is just to enjoy the moment because so much is going on. Let's just figure out what we're doing right now. Look at who influenced them. Prince William, Clinton, and then a lot of celebrities. Not the political people that the boomers had, not the war heroes of traditionalists. Places like Oklahoma City, Dawson's Creek, 90210, and the superhighway were their places. And the interesting thing about this is, can you guess? Oklahoma City is the only real place. The other three are television program places. Their experiences, though, were pretty traumatic. Columbine, 9/11, Virginia Tech, reality TV, instant messaging, and blogging. Now this is a group of parents and children who are besties, best friends, and they do everything together. I'll tell you a real quick story is that a friend of mine she was thinking about going to law school in Portland. And so she had a family meeting and asked her children and her husband what they thought about going. And of course, the 13-year-old no way wanted to go, just enjoying, just starting and going to go into high school. The 8-year-old didn't really have an opinion, and the 5-year-old said absolutely not. And she decided not to go. Now, I might suspect that she maybe really didn't want to go in the first place and that gave her the excuse. However, the message to the children was that their opinion counted as much as everybody else's. So it's important to know about the millennials because there are 81 million of them, so they've exceeded the boomers. And that's because boomers had babies later and Gen Xers had babies at traditional time. Many boomers are raising grandkids, and there's a high percentage of at least one immigrant parent in the family now, and the moms for the first time are better educated than dads. Their defining experiences, integrated classrooms. They grew up with integration. They grew up with different people around them. This time, though, violence could be at the next desk. Multiple stimuli. You get, it's coming at them from all directions. Cell cameras and YouTube. Everything is documented now. And you know this from your own experiences that, if anything happens in the world now, somebody has taken a cell video of it, right? And this is a group that's highly medicated. This is also the group where everyone wins. So you just show up and you get the, the joke is that they have a shelf full of trophies and they're not good at anything. Okay. But again, imagine how that influences your perspective on the world. They're described as empowered, free-thinking, risk-takers, pragmatic, resourceful, casual, and they assume inclusion. So their opinion has been asked for as they grow up. So you can imagine what it's like when they show up at work and they're there 1 or 2 days and start giving their opinion about how things should change, compared to somebody who's been there for 20 years, right, and expects a chain of command or that kind of thing. They're negotiators, not necessarily good negotiators, but they will negotiate. And I have not had this experience. I have had colleagues at the college tell me that they hand out their syllabus and the students will start looking through it and go, oh, can we change this date or can we change this, this activity, that kind of thing. They want to be talked to. And this is a group that, because they had a lot of influence and diversity in their classrooms and the way they were taught, is they like to collaborate. The problem with collaboration for them is it has blurred the lines of cheating and versus teamwork. So whose work is it? So they'll hand something in and it's the same thing I just read by somebody else and they haven't documented, well, we worked together. It's just, it looks like they cheated. And of course, plagiarism versus open access. They've grown up with everything out on the internet, so if it's out on the internet, A, it must be true, and B, it's open for anybody's use. They have very low tolerance for delays, because everything's been fast for them, right? And they come from K-12 systems that kept them up, involved in moving. They're used to posting it, not paper. So when we talked, somebody mentioned earlier this morning about letter writers, it's like, not this group. They expect instant access, so they'll text rather than walk across the hall. They'll call from upstairs, or they'll text, supper's ready, and of course now with Siri and Alexa, you don't even need to do that. Alexa will tell you, remind you to come down for supper. Significantly, the older person, an authority, a superior, a supervisor, a teacher, is not the only font of knowledge. So a teacher doesn't get up and say, I'm going to tell you, and this is the way it is, because they're thinking, well, I can go out on the internet and find it. And you may not be the authority. Doctors tell me that they have, it's not uncommon for somebody to come in and say, I want such and such a pill because I have such and such a problem. It's like because they've done their work, they read WebMD or whatever. And that's the law school experience that's here, is that law school professor told me that, I used to be able to talk about different issues and then he could assign them to go out and find that, and actually they're on their cell phones while he's lecturing going, that's not what it says here. So they value differences because they've grown up with diversity around them. Computers are not technology to them, Wi-Fi is. They've grown up working in groups, they're accustomed to solving problems with others, and their opinions were sought at home. They expect to learn with technology, okay? So socialization is computerized, knowledge is computerized, and comes in sound bites. So there's some research that says when they're doing research papers, they don't read the second page of the research. They read the first page, and that's as far as they'll go, if they read it at all. They're not big readers. Leaders and supervisors, I mentioned, are just another resource, and their thinking process is much more like a gaming in a computer game. So if there's a problem, let me try this. If it doesn't work, I'll come back and look at it and try something else, and I'll go kind of that hit and miss thing that's more typical of gaming as opposed to a process level. Let's think about this, then move, and then progress that way, and if it doesn't work, well, let's keep gathering stuff. So take a moment to nod if you recognize one of these people. So some motivations. Traditionalists, satisfaction is a job well done. The boomers wanted money or title or recognition or a chance to take time with their children. Gen Xers just want the freedom to make choices. And millennials want to have meaning in what they do, and again, free time. So, why do I have to go drive to work when I can do it at home remotely? And that kind of thing. The way they solve problems, traditionals value expertise, and you do what you were told. The boomers, what other ways could we do this? Gen Xers value processing, similar to boomers in that. Let's look at this, how it can be done. And millennials value their own reality, and again, that kind of trial and error. If it's true for me, then it must be true. If at first you don't succeed, traditionalists, you know this, you stick with it, you don't give up. Boomers hang in there and just like, if it don't succeed the first time, it's just part of the process. Gen Xers, if you don't succeed at the first time, it's like, I got better things to do with my time. And millennials expect help from others. Receiving feedback. No news is good news. I don't want to know, right? The boomers, regular with documentation, ask for what you want because the truth will set you free. Gen Xers, sorry to bother you, can you tell me how I'm doing? And millennials, I've texted you 3 times in the last 20 minutes and I haven't heard anything. Giving feedback. Traditionals don't believe that it's really their place, because I'm not an expert, right? Boomers want to process it through talk. Gen Xers, I'll give you feedback anonymously. And the millennials, this sucks. Freely given, right? Now, it's unsolicited, freely delivered, it's immediate, you don't take it personally, it just means I don't like this, okay? Do-overs. Traditionals are embarrassed to have not done it correctly the first time. Boomers engaged in redoing as part of the process. Gen Xers assume do-overs are just part of the plan and will often come, hand in one thing, and already have the resubmission ready. And again, you wouldn't be surprised that millennials, if you get an award for just showing up, they're surprised that you would ask for something more. I handed in something, wasn't that enough? Balancing life, of course, was completely foreign to traditionals, right? Boomers invented the concept because of moms going into the workforce. Gen Xers desire balance now rather than later. I mentioned they watched how people didn't balance life and then didn't have one. And so they're like, we'll do it now. You can kind of just think about how many of you had parents who, or probably dads, who took time out of the middle of their day to go watch you in a play or in a sporting events. It just wasn't done, and now it's very common. They arrange their work schedule around that, okay? Millennials have been balancing things forever. It's just part of their lives because they tend to be overscheduled. Language distinctions, mentioned that traditionalists were journalists and letter writers. My grandfather wrote in his journal every night, so we have great stories, and we know when they redid the floor and when something broke. I mean, it's from sublime to the ridiculous. Boomers' language is a changing form. They like to explain things. Gen Xers use clip sentences. I don't know if you remember shows like Seinfeld, News Radio, The West Wing. How is it? Fine? Good. What do you think? Fine? Good? That kind of thing. And millennials, of course, are doing text messaging, emoticons, and new vulgarities are used as casual emphasis. So the F word is used a lot, not because for emphasis like it would be in our day, it's just kind of part of the language. So instead of, I might say it's a really big thing, they would say it's an effing big thing, that kind of stuff. And then if they make mistakes grammatically, they don't correct them because that's not important to them. It's part of the language and how the language is evolving. So even adults now who grow up with different grammar will say between you and I, or me and her went. It's kind of like that shift. And languages do that. And I think our speaker this morning mentioned that too, in terms of society determines what the language is. Messages they like to hear: traditionals, your experience is of value to us, of course. Boomers, your unique perspective or vision is needed here. And that experience being of value to us, it's like then people who work at, like as greeters and things like that. Gen Xers, we're a casual group, so just get the work done however you want to do it. And millennials, they also want to know that they're making a difference. So generational difference here. The dad says, "Hi, sweetie, how was your school today?" You can read it on my blog, Dad. Quick word about Gen Zs, also known as I generation or the silent generation. They're entering the world of work now, but slowly. And the reason they're doing it slowly is they're living with their parents longer. Jobs are not that available. And a lot of them don't have daily skills, everyday skills to do that kind of thing. They were born after 2000. Technology is a lifestyle. There's nothing special about technology. Communication is immediate, and they've built massive communities without any personal meeting. So they have friends all over, but they've never met face-to-face, that kind of stuff. Some find sharing space intrusive, not surprising. And also not surprising, they may not do well in speaking in public. They expect instant responses and tend to be impatient as a result, and they've been taught that they are special, just as the guy said, and unique, in an effort to instill high self-esteem. But what the research is showing is that they're lacking self-efficacy, a sense that they can handle things themselves. I joke that I wasn't sure that my college students could boil water if they knew that it could be boiled. So according to the researchers Jean Twang and Keith Campbell, this group is fairly narcissistic for a couple of reasons. Again, not going through difficult situations where they have to kind of build on that and find out that they can manage it. Doesn't give them a sense that I can manage, I can do things. And because of the rapid, you can go home and try this out. Watch television, and television changes its picture on average every 3 seconds. And because it didn't matter whether it was like Violent or Sesame Street, just the rapid change means that the neural connection is not being formed all completely. And it turns out that the empathic gene is at the end of that neural connection. So if that's not being developed, the idea of empathy doesn't come into play here. So just a quick overview, and I'll make these available to you. So success, fought hard and won, versus just show up, just keep showing up. Notice the team players on each end are important. Education was a dream, a birthright, a way to get ahead, and for millennials, it's lifelong. I love this one. Managing money, traditionals saved, boomers spend, Gen Xers hedge, and millennials spend their parents' money. Program, of course, has changed in its definition. Social programs versus reprogramming or deprogramming people, and then software versus very sophisticated software. The family is also interesting because we go from mom and dad and grandparents to mom and dad to mom or dad and to moms and dads. Okay. Their outlook: practical, optimistic, skeptical, and hopeful. Let's see, what else do we have here? Work ethic, view of authority. I like this one because you go from, you respect authority versus you're polite to them. But again, not because you have any special knowledge or experience, it's because you're older. And then turnoffs are interesting too, because across the generation, these four especially, the traditionalists tend to see vulgarity as offensive, and of course the millennials in turn find intolerance offensive. So this is just kind of a broad view, ours is one perspective and one side of the story. So you want to avoid generational bias by flexing those pecs, right? Paying attention to what were the political, economic, cultural, and social events that this person grew up around. So getting to know the individual is important. Creating opportunities for cross-generational learning. The French are doing this by offering, I think it's on Tuesday, older people can go in for the equivalent of $2, have lunch in the cafeterias of the grade school kids. So they just sit around and tell stories and find out what's going on with the kids and that kind of stuff. Maintain curiosity and just ask. So before you say something, just say, tell me more about that. Trust that they'll work it out. You know, your generation did. So when you start to hear yourself making judgment and getting into that, oh, ain't it awful, there they go, remember that your parents worried, maybe still worrying about your generation. And each generation lives within its own awareness and succeeds. We've done it, every generation will. They're everywhere. And just imagine a world where we listen to everyone's stories and learn we are not as different as we are the same. So regardless of age or generation, we're working with variety, and appreciation is more effective than judgment. So turn to someone and share something you can appreciate about another generation that's very different from your own experience. And thank you. Okay, we have some time. Pardon me? You want to see the second part of it? Yes. Okay. Let's see. Oh, that's not right. That's not right. Let me just go back to this. I thought it would just be here.
Here, did something like
Yeah.
in Atlanta. You can't go anywhere.
How does this work?
Put this in context for the millennials. This is a commercial that was shown on a television that people actually had to get up and walk across the room and touch the unit to change the channel. It was hand to mouth. Difficult times back then. This television had two metallic telescoping things that would come out of the top. And you would twist these things to try to get the signal a little bit better. Signal? Did he just say signal? Signal. When you twisted them around and it didn't work, you would go to the kitchen and you would come from the kitchen with a big sheet of what? That's right. If you said tinfoil, raise your hand. Look at them. Those are old people. It hadn't been tinfoil in a long time. If you said tinfoil, it's because your kitchen drawer is full of tinfoil because you won't throw it away. It's still good. Well, I don't need to throw this away. It's next to a ball of rubber bands or something like that. We might need all these things someday. One more. You would walk to the unit. You would place your hand on the knob. In perhaps a hurry, you would change it quickly, and you would come away with the knob in your hand. And you would say things under your breath. You'd place the knob on top of that television, and you'd go and get a pair of pliers. There you go. There are people here who know exactly what I'm talking about. However, the millennials in the room are going, pliers? I don't know. Oh, wait a minute. I've seen these TVs at the Smithsonian in Washington. They're under glass. You can't touch them anymore. They've got alarms if you get too close. Wow. But every now and then, people produce truly special different unique people. Contrast this with the 9th place soccer team. What are they carrying? Trophies, that's right. 0-9, trophies and pizza for everybody. Who's doing this? Right here. This is my generation that's making this happen right now. So I want you to contrast this. This has likely been a big part of your patient base and perhaps will be coming up. They're not gone. They're just a big part of the patient base. As an administrator, as the MDs back at your practices, whatever it may be, the chances are someone from this generation played a huge role in preparing them for what they do, as either a teacher or more likely a mentor. Somebody took them under their arm and said, you can do this and I'm going to help you do it. This is where it's come from. This is what's coming. This is a lot of your history, your bones, where you've been. This is the next generation. This is my generation. This is the Xers and the Millennials. They're having babies. They're chock-a-block in the maternity ward these days. This is a lot of where you got your values from, and this is who's back at your offices keeping an eye on things while you're with me right now.
Thank you. It's not on.
Out front.
There you go.
Yeah, this is David. I spent a considerable amount of time overseas for various reasons, including military. And I can remember coming back to this country and being shocked by what's happened since I was gone. It's just like everything had turned over in years or months, and it gave me a sense of not being in the right place anymore.
Yeah, I get it.
Well, this is the other half of that duo. When I was in college, the Beatles were long past, but in any event, I was in a rhetoric class and I was assigned to write something about modern culture. So at that time, there was a guy who was going around doing all these lectures on the Beatles. And his thesis was that the Beatles' music was promoting communism. So I wrote a whole paper on communism, hypnotism, and the Beatles.
Is that still available? Well, was it the Beatles that if you played it backwards, it was satanic?
Yeah.
I can't remember which, is that? Oh, only one of their songs, okay.
Paul is dead or something like that.
Back here.
Oh, thank you.
Go down. Yeah, Bob again. It's a good thing the Beatles didn't stay popular, right? Yeah, this is a lot of fun, and I think there's a lot of truth in the types that you've been defining. What I'm curious about is why these characteristics group together like this, and there's a certain pulse. At a certain point in time, things start to change. And my question is, do you know if any sociologists are really trying to figure out why these changes occur when they do? I don't think they're strict groupings, but they are trends.
I think that's a good question. You know, what comes to mind is just kind of at what age and stage of development does this group kind of move from teenagers into young adults, and that's a time when typically we're breaking away from the family and distinguishing ourselves. And so, but what time, I'm not really sure. That's a good question, though. Interesting to think about.
Gwen Ellen Jenks up here in the back. First of all, I'd like to recommend a book that has recently been, is out called The Hidden Brain. Mm-hmm. And it's awfully good if anybody's interested in how bias gets into our brains and we think, no, I don't believe that. Well, somewhere in your brain you do. One of my concerns about the current generation is that when kids have not been allowed to fail, and then pick themselves up and fix it themselves, they come away with, I believe, a sense of incompetence that is so buried they don't recognize what has been said to them. They go out into the world, they feel like they aren't good enough or cannot cope. And that, I think that's where a lot of the younger generations' depression and even suicide may be rooted in. And you're welcome to comment on that, but that's just what I've come to think.
That's what the current research is suggesting also, is that this is a group that is highly, susceptible to information they get on the internet. And of course, FaceTime and Facebook, those kinds of things, people don't write about their failures. They write about how wonderful everything is. And so at a very early age, it's normal to compare yourself at different stages early on, but they don't have any counter information that's like, oh, this is normal. You feel bad because you lost or something like that. And they're suggesting that that's why there's a higher rate of suicide younger and younger than ever before. The generation, let's see, I'm trying to think it would be like the Gen Xers had a high rate of eating disorders. This generation has a high rate of suicide. It's like, the other thing about generations and why, if you are a grandparent, tell stories, tell the stories of where you came from, where the family came from, because children are raised without any sense of why they're important in the world. Even though people are telling them you're special, well, if everyone is special, how am I uniquely different? And so they get a message, so they're trying to find them, how they fit in. Well, if you have a sense that you're a part of this family and this generation of family, that that it's part of your job to continue this, there's a reason to keep going. A lot of kids don't have that at this point.
Well, I'm afraid we're about out of time here, so.
Well, I'll make this stuff available, and I can stay afterward, so if you have questions. But thank you very much. I appreciate your attention.